Responsibility.
All right, so let's take open-mindedness. They are wholeheartedness, open-mindedness, and responsibility. So we're going to begin with open-mindedness. Can any of you think of a teacher that you had that showed that quality? Thalia, you can? Share it for us, please. Loudly.
I had a teacher in grade 12, Miss Smart, lovely name. She taught us GP. She was a former student of the school, so she wasn't that much older. But she was open-minded in that she was following the curriculum, and at the same time, whenever one of us students had an idea, whether it was for a project or a way to approach something, instead of saying, no, that's wrong, that's not what it says, she would say, well, let's think about that, let's look at ways in which that could be right. Well, it doesn't say it on this sheet, but. And so that made us feel that it's not just what's in the book. If you go through the thinking process and you figure it out, then it could be the answer. Just because it's not listed there doesn't mean that your point is invalid.
Right. So open-mindedness means you're open to different perspectives in terms of how the students relate to the material, but also that you're open to different perspectives in how you present the material. So you're not presenting it only in one way, because as a teacher you have inherent power to sway how students receive the material. Right?
Yeah.
Think of advertising. When the people write the jingles in advertising, they're trying to sell you sugary cereal, so they make it sound really wonderful, but they don't tell you about the other aspects of the sugary cereal. Why? Because they want you to buy the sugary cereal, so they're sending you in one direction. So if you're open-minded both in how to present the curriculum and in how students might receive it. So if they come back and give you an answer that was not what you expected, you don't necessarily dismiss it out of hand and say, no, that's not it. You listen to it and engage and consider it, right? Open-mindedness is linked to some extent, I guess, to open-endedness.
Yeah.
All right? Did you want to say something? All right? That's one characteristic, and these characteristics actually come from the work of John Dewey. So these authors are referring back to John Dewey, who's a very well-known, highly regarded American educator who believed strongly and advocated for experiential education, that you learn a lot by doing. That's how you remember, and also constructive education. He's one of the fathers of constructivism, John Dewey. All right? Influenced a lot of how the American school system has developed. The second attitude or characteristic, let's look at responsibility. What do you think they mean in the article by responsibility? I'm trying to be interactive. I could, of course, do a PowerPoint where all I say is what each thing is and the definition, and you all just sit there and read it. That's boring. And I will do some PowerPoints, but next week there'll be a PowerPoint, so you can gear up for the PowerPoint, right? But for this week, there's no PowerPoint. I don't do PowerPoints every week. All right, so I need you to participate. I know this is a terrible time of the afternoon. If you need to stand up and do jumping jacks or run in place, touch your toes, that's fine with me. I don't care. No laughter.
Responsibility.
Responsibility. Anybody want to come up with? Jason, you're raising your hand?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Realizing that there are consequences for the decisions and actions that you take.
That you make, this is what I think you just said, that you make conscious decisions about the actions that you take?
No, well, kind of, I think that there are consequences for the actions and the decisions.
Okay, sorry, that there are consequences for the decisions and the actions that you make and the actions that you take. Right. So that you're aware of your responsibility in the classroom as a teacher. Right? One of those elements that the authors speak of is the concept of a hidden curriculum. When they say hidden curriculum, which is a phrase that's used quite frequently, they mean things that students learn in school that are not necessarily intended to be learned. So for example, if a teacher always comes late to class, is not dressed appropriately, the students might learn, it's okay to show up like this. I don't have to take this person that seriously. She's clearly here. She's not seen as a professional because she's come into class with, I don't know, what would be unprofessional, like,
Rollers in her.
yeah, 5 earrings in her ears and
No piercing.
tight clothes and yeah, things that are not perceived as professional in your society.
Yeah.
That's one of the negative components of the hidden curriculum. A positive component would be if the teacher came on time, prepared, dressed appropriately, acted appropriately, then you would learn, well, this person respects our time, and so here we are, we're here on time. I hear students complain that they go to class and the teacher don't show up, or the teacher shows up and then leaves and just sets work on the board and off they go. I'm coming to you. That's an example. The school is not going to put out a statement that says, we are going to teach the children that they must show up on time and they must, it's sort of embedded, it's understood that you're going to do that. But then if you have staff members that are not adhering to that code, so in Jamaica, there's now a dress code for teachers. I don't know if there are dress codes in the other islands. Did you know there was a dress code?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Is there a dress code for teachers in Bermuda? Not at the tertiary level. So much. I don't think they care about that. It's the teachers' union.
No.
Bermuda, is there a dress code in Bermuda?
Sometimes we have rough days where people are allowed to wear whatever they want, like whatever. But every other day, it's fine.
Right. And it's the same here. It's the same here. And one of the ways we get around it with students is that all of our students wear uniforms. So all of our students are uniformly dressed. So there's one of the beautiful things about uniforms, although to the children it's boring, I suppose, is that everybody looks the same, essentially. Nobody is outshining anybody else by virtue of what they can afford to buy or not afford to buy, etc., etc. That's one of the of course, it doesn't allow for individual expression necessarily, but once in a while, schools will have, you know, fun day or whatever they call it. Girls' Day and Boys' Day. Right. Another example of the hidden curriculum might be a teacher that always calls on girls and doesn't call on the boys. Would be implying to the boys that the girls are smarter. He's not going to come out and say, girls are smarter, so I'm calling on the girl. No. But in the hidden interaction, in the relationship, so the hidden curriculum can be found in the relationship, in the way the school is set up, as well as like the timetable, and also what kinds of courses are taught or not taught. What kind of ideas are shared or not shared is another aspect of hidden curriculum. Dina, you wanted to say something?
I have a recollection when I was
Loudly, but you're far from them.
Yeah, when I was in high school and in CXC math, you know, or fifth form teacher or 11th grade, you know, everyone loved the way most persons loved the way she had a very high, she would tolerate a lot of vulgarity and stuff, you know. Now, when we got to sixth form, not many persons chose math, you know, but I really love math, so I chose math. And in sixth form, we got a teacher that, you know, we expected because she taught at the lower
Primary levels.
She taught at the third form, fourth form, that level, low, right. She has never taught math like K math. Now, many persons I saw, you know, they probably had this feeling that she wouldn't really get it all done to us as we'd expect. Now, I realized that she was coming off and she would teach us, she would test us, probably, I think it was like every 3 weeks, she would test us and stuff and so on. Now, I had a classmate who she was just good at everything, every scientific course, you know? And we all tried to be friends. We were all like family, you know? Now, when she and I, we love math, so we both get some good grades and all of that. Now, one day the teacher just came in class and she's like, she said, Dina and David, yes, you got the highest grade, but God, you need to fix your handwriting, you know? And, you know, when she said that, we all had, like, we brought them into laughter because we were saying, okay, yeah, we know that we write really ugly, and she's like, yes, you did well, and I mean, they're numbers, but, you know, I don't want you going into exams, and, you know, when you go in there, the persons who are marking the paper, they can't, you know, I understand because I'm used to you guys, but, you know, and she's like, and you know, many persons probably feel a little ashamed or so, but I actually took it and I accepted it because I'm saying, you know, at least she's looking and she wants for the, you know, for the betterment. She wants to improve with her handwriting so that we don't go in there. She was like, "You writing? Are you?" She said something about doctors or something. She just made it a little
Right,
joke.
doctors don't have good handwriting.
Right.
Right, so that
And
point,
that showed me something.
yeah, back to
you know,
caring and concern.
she was concerned, you
Yeah.
know, and that really showed me something that she took.
But I'm seeing that as a
Loudly.
I'm seeing that as a double-edged sword.
This is Sonia.
I'm seeing that as a double-edged sword because if she comes into the classroom and say, Dina and whoever else, you guys got the highest grade, but your handwriting, what kind of impact does that have on the other student?
No, but you see, because it wasn't a lot of students in that class, because math, a lot of students didn't choose math for K. It's like probably 7 students or so. So when she came in, like most of them in class, they knew that, you know, like Davy and I we were in love with math, you know, so they didn't take that as a big deal.
Okay.
So,
Right.
you know, but
Yeah, well, you have to, it's about the relationship. So she's saying it within a certain context.
Right.
Clearly, the teacher, she could have said it to you quietly. She didn't have to say it. But that, I mean, that's neither here nor there. She's still showing concern. She wasn't trying to berate you or make fun of you, which some teachers do as a method of control. So those teachers who use that kind of tactic are not really showing these qualities of being open-minded, wholehearted, and responsible. Wholeheartedness is the third element that they speak about, and in this sense, that to me is linked to enthusiasm and the sense that if you're really going to be reflective, you have to be self-critical. So you have to sit back and look at what you did when you were teaching. How did your lesson go? Did everybody look engaged, or was Bob in the corner falling asleep? Was he falling asleep because he was bored or because he was hungry? Why was he falling asleep? Did you go near him and find out without singling him out and making fun of him? How are you interacting with your students? Just as important in your reflection as whether or not you taught the lesson that you wanted to teach. So there's a really lovely example of a teacher who taught kindergarten all her life and has written a number of books. One of them is called You Can't Say, You Can't Play. And she spent a lot of time observing her students. So she would keep a running record of her observations of her students, paying attention. So Davy fell asleep today. Does he fall asleep at the same time every day? This kind of before going to speak to him about it. So watch before speaking in depth. I mean, you'd go wake him up, but you'd note that, right? And so she would spend some time every day writing in a journal, and she turned those journals into multiple books. That's just one. Her name is Vivian Gussin Paley. She's retired now. And she says in her writing that keeping those reflective notes would help her to better connect with her students and become a better teacher herself. So she would realize, say, if she was teaching only to the students who are verbal learners versus mixing it up so that there was an element for tactile learners, an element for auditory learners, an element for verbal learners, right? Visual or Vivian Gussin, Gussin, Paley, Paley. So that technique worked for her because it caused her to reflect not only on her practice, meaning, did I cover my curriculum today? Did I do it enthusiastically? Did I do it energetically? Did I do it in the time frame I wanted to do it? But were my students engaged? Do they look like they're beginning to get it? Did most of them understand it? Or do I need to go back and review it? When I'm reviewing it, what can I do differently to make it work better for those that didn't catch on? So that sort of self-reflection is a critical part of being engaged. Right, so those teachers who don't respond well, you have to go through, what they call it, observations or so on, where people come to observe you from time to time. They have a name for that. No, well, that's when you're first teaching. But once you start teaching, every once in a while, they come and observe how you're doing. Evaluation, thank you. Evaluation. That you don't take that necessarily as something that's only meant to be out there criticizing you negatively, but it's somebody who is supposedly non-biased, who's coming into your classroom and who is going to help you to see ways that you can strengthen your practice, right? and share information which maybe they have, because oftentimes these are people that have taught for many years. So it's really for you to benefit from those kinds of critiques, constructive criticism. So the three elements are open-minded in this article: open-mindedness, responsibility, and wholeheartedness. Now, this article goes into a little bit more along the lines of teaching involving both moral and responsible action, meaning when you are given your curriculum and you're deciding how to teach, you're also given the scope of, in America, this is based on America, okay, obviously, to some extent, what elements you can bring into the teaching. We don't have, in Jamaica, as far as I know, that level of latitude that they have in America, because they're not bound to as many tests in most of those states as we are. I don't know about the other islands, to be honest. But he's saying, or they are saying, teachers can make moral choices when they make decisions to have students attain one educational objective instead of another, and these are conscious actions that can result in consequences. These can be observed when teachers develop their curriculum and choose their instructional materials. So, for example, the teacher in the movie, Mrs. G, she had a very broad, because nobody believed that they were going to do anything, so she used that to her advantage. And she went and she decided whatever book she wanted to have them read. They just wanted them to be able to read and pass state tests, but the state tests weren't necessarily keyed to specific books. It was keyed to the ability to read and comprehend and answer questions. So as long as she could get them reading and asking them questions and getting them engaged, they would be building those skills. So she made a conscious decision to choose books that would bring both historical knowledge to the students, but also to which they would be able to relate. And that was how she would engage. And it worked for her, right? It made them be able to, and by asking them to write journals, she didn't ask them to write journals and then say, all right, all of you just put them here on the desk, where any and everybody could look through the journals. Right, she respected the concept of writing a journal, that it was really only going to be between her and the student. So she had a way of, they must put it in a certain section of cover, if they wanted her to read it. If they wanted her to read it. And while she was reading the journals, she started out just looking at the content and not so much the grammar. But in going through it, obviously, she was teaching them both. And they were engaged because they were writing about stuff that was important to them. And in many cases, for that set of students, cathartic and therapeutic. So using journals and then having them be able to write a book, which then actually became a real book. I mean, obviously she didn't start out saying we're going to write a book that's going to be published. She just wanted them to write, because she knew that the more she wrote, the more they wrote, the better their speaking skills would be, the better their vocabulary skills would be, the better their grammatical skills would be. And when you have to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and do pair conferencing, so you give me your writing, I give you my writing when we're publishing, and you give me your comments and I give you my comments, there's an element of mutual respect. So there's a lot of social skill building that was going on there too. When at the end, when she had them keying it into the computers and turning it into a book, which they published. But also think of the self-esteem that would have come from that. These students who believed and whose society termed had no voice, weren't giving them any voice, or the only voice they had was if they were deemed to put graffiti on the wall, or if they spoke out in rude ways, or it was negative.
Worst case, the head of department really basically belittling them.
Right, the head of department had no belief that they could do anything. And then when she had that top student transferred into her class, that validated her as a teacher too. Right, to know, because remember she said to her husband said to her, how do you know that they're really learning anything, that you're really teaching them anything? Yeah, you haven't taught any smart kids. And then she got a smart kid voluntarily transferring into the class. So that was a feather in her cap, right? But did she treat that kid any differently? No. Right, so she had clear goals for them. She wanted them to be engaged in school. She wanted them to feel like they had talent and that they had self-worth. That's what she wanted. And she achieved that, not in the first term, but throughout the year, to the point where the students didn't want to lose her as their teacher for the next year. Now, granted, you know, that's an unusual, extreme case. So when you're doing your pieces of writing on that, that's an extreme case. Nobody is saying that to be a good teacher, you have to have 5 jobs. I don't remember how many she had, 3 jobs, and take the children on field trips outside of school time and go to a restaurant. You know, nobody is saying that. But she was going beyond the call of duty because she had an extreme situation and because she cared. To the point where she lost her relationship with her husband. So you have to have a balance.
Marriage at risk.
But she didn't go into that knowing she was going to do that, right? I mean, she didn't willingly say, oh, I'm going to do this and it's going to put my marriage at risk. No. She was just following.
Go home and be very enthusiastic.
Yeah. She was following her own heart. She was following her concern. She was moving in purpose. That's a nice phrase. Yes, she was. And she was a reflective teacher because she would go home and she would think and think and think. I'm not connecting with these kids. How can I connect with these kids? Why can't they respect me? What was the first thing, those of you who have seen the film, what was the first activity or lesson activity that she did that got them sort of to
Kind of look at
pay attention? Yeah. Anybody, not Kingston. Anybody who's not in Kingston. Yes, the Tupac Shakur song was one.
I thought it was the genocide story.
No, that came later. That was another one. Then there was also the one where she had them all stand up. Right. The line. And the line game is brilliant. And in its simplicity, oftentimes the most simple things are the most impactful.
But I think the line was very aptly chosen because in America, you know, the line thing in terms of racism, and that was one of the underlying themes in the movie.
Yeah, in the movie.
And even when you go back to Tracy Chapman, Across the Bridge, over the tracks, separating whites from blacks.
Yeah.
You never cross the line, so it was.
No, and that debate continues now in America when you see what's been happening recently with police shootings and so on. Right, unfortunately. I know it's amazing, but anyhow, the line.
Very good.
She just had that idea. She didn't go in there necessarily with that plan, and she just started asking them questions. And what was the idea behind the line game? What was she trying to get them to see? Remember, this was taking place at a time in LA, right after there had been massive riots in the city about Rodney King. You all would have been, some of you would remember that. In the 1990s. Celia?
Trying to show them that they were not that different.
That amongst themselves, that they had many similarities about important things. Then the differences that had divided them into these cliques where they always sit in the same places and they always only talk to the people from their cultural backgrounds. Right. So she then used that and built that, the genocide activity, and then the field trips and the journals into making her classroom a community.
Mm-hmm.
You saw how she took pains to make the classroom look nice and welcoming for them so that they could feel safe in that space.
Because it's a matter of safety.
Well, for them, there was a serious matter of safety.
Yes.
Right. So she's an example of a great teacher. That woman, I'm sure, I mean, I don't know more about her teaching than that TEDx talk, but just by the fact that she speaks with such passion, you would think somebody who's dedicated her life to teaching and learning, that she would do her best to constantly do her best in teaching. And that's one of the things, you know, she referenced a colleague that said in the beginning of the talk, oh, they don't pay me to like the kids.
Pay me to just teach them.
I'm just here to teach them, and I don't understand. If they don't get it, they don't get it. I do my best. But a lot of other teachers, and that article, one of the articles that I sent you today is based on an education reform movement called Teach for America. And you'll learn more about that. Teach for America tries to take these kinds of characteristics, which are leadership skills, by the way. All of them are, you could change the word teacher and put leader, right? You can't be a good leader if you can't reflect on what you're doing.
True.
If you're not open-minded, then you're a dictator, right? So, in Teach for America, the concept behind Teach for America, I'll quickly tell you, is it was a thesis of a Princeton undergraduate in the late 1980s, and she was looking at ways that you could close the achievement gap between children born in poverty and children born in middle, upper income homes. And she was looking at the issue at that time of a teacher shortage in the US. So she did this thesis where she posed the idea that you could recruit outstanding college students in sort of an American-based Peace Corps that was teaching only. And they would be deployed into schools, high schools, elementary schools, that's what they call them in the US. And they would teach for 2 years. They would get some training beforehand in the summer, and they would be trained in an ongoing way for the 2 years. And they would get to defer in loans if they had student loans, and they would get health insurance, and they would get the salary of a starting teacher. That worked in some states based on states' different laws or in different states about who can teach, what criteria you have to fit to teach. And now, 20-some years later, or more than 20 years later, Teach for America is all over in every state. It's in many countries around the world. France, Colombia, India, Ecuador, Chile, Italy, China, Canada, what's the ones in Eastern Europe? Latvia, Russia. I can't remember all the countries, okay? And the idea is similar. The idea is you go to colleges and you recruit outstanding, meaning high-achieving, ambitious young people who show leadership skills, whose GPA meets a certain criteria, but they have to show leadership skills, who have an interest in social justice. And they commit to teaching for 2 years. In America and in England now, it is one of the most competitive things to get into post-college immediately. It's up there with people competing to get into jobs on Wall Street and so on. And what it has shown, it's very, very competitive. It's very much harder to get in now than in the 1990s. There's a network of graduates that you then become part of. You go in, and the idea is that you change the scope and the landscape of those who are making education policy by building these future leaders and giving them experience on the front lines. So that people who then go on to become politicians, mayors, governors, ministers of government would have had this experience teaching in a classroom for 2 years, for 4 years, for however long. A lot of the people that have gone into Teach for America, although they may not have thought of going into teaching after that, before that, have stayed, gotten master's degrees while in the program. They get credits, etc., depending on which state. And they've gone on to get their certification, and they've gone on to start new school reform movements, some of them. Those who didn't stay in the program and went back, finished their 2 years and went back to their original post-academic track of becoming a medical doctor or a journalist or a banker or whatever it might be, they have remained involved in education, meaning they volunteer to serve on school boards, they sit on NGO boards, so the experience stays with them. In America, it's much harder. When you speak to the founder of Teach for America, which I've done, and her name is Wendy Kopp, if you speak to her and you say, what were you hoping to do? She says, well, I was hoping that we could eventually be able to change how policy is made so that the policy is based more on practical knowledge of what happens in the classroom and the reality of the gap that exists in what is supposed to be the richest country in the world, meaning America. She's focused on America. But in America, we have so many different school systems, and you have school systems controlled at the state level and at the federal level, that it's going to take much longer to effect systemic change. But in smaller countries or island states, you could see that change faster, she says. So in countries like Latvia has the same amount of people as Jamaica, by the way. You might see more people who have had the Teach for Latvia experience going into their ministry, which will shift how decisions are made. I've sat in Jamaica, the Ministry of Education here, and I've seen how decisions are made, and I'm not going to go into that, okay? Because some you'd be shocked in some cases, right? Really? Yeah, shocked, but maybe not if you're cynical. But so the point of all of that was that Teach for America has just as many critics as it has supporters. Because obviously people are saying, oh, you're coming to take away the teachers' union spots. The teachers' unions don't necessarily like Teach for America. But one of the things that Teach for America assessments have shown is that when you put these young people, these are ambitious young people, they're not used to failing at anything. So when they go into the classroom, this is another challenge, another opportunity. They want their students to do well. They commit, they're young, they don't have families yet, they don't have those responsibilities yet. They're not jaded in the system. They're excited about their subject, whatever it may be. So they give it their all and more. And what has happened is that's not always well received in the school because the other teachers are saying, who are these young people?
Yes.
Who do they think they are? Where they're not even trained teachers. But that's one set. The other set is that there has been sort of a domino effect where the enthusiasm and the energy that they bring to the school spills over into some of the other teachers. What they have yet to be able to do, unfortunately, is to do a study where they can say, okay, if I put a Teach for America teacher in grade 1, when is the next grade, and that teacher works, when is the next grade that I would need to try and put that kind of teacher again? How long does the impact of grade 1 with that teacher last? If I only have 4 teachers to put in the primary school, what grades do I put them in? Do I put them all in grade 1? Do I put them in grade 1, grade 3, grade 5, grade 6? What do I do? They're trying to figure that out now. It is, I can't remember how many people are in Teach for America every year now, but it's thousands, tens of thousands of people. It's like a Peace Corps, and they get their loan deferment and all of that. It's all of that from a simple idea. So there's somebody who said, never doubt the power of ideas to change the world or something like that. That's what Wendy Kopp was trying to do with her idea. And her idea was based on the belief that if teachers went in and they were caring and they had leadership qualities, she was trying to build a whole new army of education leaders. She wasn't necessarily hoping they would stay in teaching. She just wanted them to have that experience so that when they move out of the classroom, that it would impact the system. So if you speak to her, she'll say, it's not a teacher prep program. It's not a teacher prep program. It's a leader development program. And that's what she was trying to do. And these principles, all of those teachers are taught to teach with constructivist, from a constructivist standpoint, experiential learning, and taught to try and reflect on what they're doing. They have peer groups, because remember, these are 21-year-old, 22-year-old kids who go into classrooms in some cases, very difficult situations where they don't understand the culture that they've been placed in. So they have to have a peer support group that they can talk with. So sometimes they wind up rooming with each other, and they have that support. Or they would break because they're put in classrooms with kids who have drug issues, whose parents are not around, who might have HIV/AIDS. These are all the kinds of things, and they're not used to that. That's not their experience growing up, some of them. So, that said, you're going to read, I have some more in another couple of sessions, you'll read more about Teach for America. But it's an idea that doesn't exist in the Caribbean, in the English-speaking Caribbean yet. Why? Because of the teacher unions, is one. In Jamaica right now, we have a surplus of teachers. So although the minister can say at any given time, okay, you have a first degree, I can confer on you the okay to teach. It's okay for you to go once you have your background check and all of that taken. It's not as difficult as perhaps in some states or some other countries to get that ability to go in the classroom. At a time where he has a glut of teachers that are yet to retire, he's not going to buck the teacher union and say, oh, let me put these young people to teach. But where it could be done would be in subjects where we don't have teachers with the content knowledge. So in Jamaica, that is at the high school level more in terms of math and science subjects. Not so much chemistry, I understand, more around physics and bio. Yeah, so I heard. I don't know. The data is not confirmed, but that would be an interesting pilot to try and run in Jamaica.
Suggest it.
I have multiple times, and it's an ongoing process.
Like swimming pool.
Yeah, you can't do it as a Teach for America affiliated thing unless you meet a whole bunch of their criteria. There's a lot of criteria now. It's not like in the 1990s, but it isn't so much that. It would be, you can still pilot it, you can adapt it, you can tweak it, you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't have to be called Teach for Jamaica. And you could still try it. And once you work out the kinks, then you could decide whether it's really worth becoming a Teach for Jamaica, Teach for America affiliated thing. And in Jamaica, like in your other islands, we would have access to people in the diaspora. But can you imagine if we started a program where we were trying to attract people in the diaspora to come here and take teaching positions away from Jamaicans who are living here? So you'd have to handle that very carefully. So Teach for India, for example, Teach for Malaysia, Teach for the Philippines, they recruit in their diaspora. But we wouldn't start that way because that would be a surefire way to make everybody upset. And you don't want to begin from that standpoint. All right, so that's this article. Is there anything that anybody else would like to add about this article? Did it make you think differently about teaching? Had you thought about the importance of reflecting of those criteria before? Anybody? Anybody? In St. Lucia, in Dominica, Montego Bay, it's only you alone. What happened to Dexton? Hello. Oh, hi, Dexton. Okay, we see you now. Okay. Anybody want to add anything to this article? When you're doing your movie review, the film critique, this would be one of the articles you could use when you're giving examples from the movie, backing up the actions that you see Mrs. G or the other teachers portray. Who has wanted to say something? Go ahead. Can't see. Nobody. All right. I'm going to give you a 5 to 10 minute break. Jason requested that. But I'm doing that so you can all thank Jason. I'm doing that on the belief that 10 minutes from now I'm going to start back. And I'd like to see you back in your seats. I would not like to see you strolling in 20 minutes from now, or then I won't be able to continue giving you the break. And I'm quite happy to give you the break. All right, so 10 minutes and then we'll come back and discuss the second article and wrap up. Off you go. Vernon, how do I find out if he's here? If he's listening? He's here? Hi, Vernon. Can you hear me?
Vernon,
okay. Oh, he can see.
I'm here. I hear you.
Okay, welcome, Vernon.
Thank
I
you.
was wondering what Craig was doing with the camera. Okay, just checking that you're okay and that you're with us.
Yes, I'm with you. I'm listening. I'm good. Thanks.
Oh, yes. How is she? Oh. You know, I knew that. I remember that she moved to Case. Give her my love.
I certainly will. She's gone off today on vacation, but we work very closely.
She's very dynamic.
We work very closely.
She's very dynamic.
I'll tell her that.
You didn't watch it? Sonia watched it.
She was on Sunday.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Reverend Dr.
Mary, yes.
What do you want to know? What do you want to know about the movie? Look here, name. What is that? Email today? Yeah, but you have to look at anything like that. Then you can carry where you got the email today? Eh? You got the email from them? I didn't get it today.
Next week.
Well, the last of
I don't get
Another
it.
phone, maybe.
I'm not on your email. I would have
Oh, well, I can forward it to you. Maybe you're,
I need to go home with my food. One time. I'm okay.
added it, you added it here. Right, and I should have. But you got the hard copies of everything last week, right? Right, so it's just the email today then.
You know?
Ingrid, I got it. But it's in fact, I can do that now. Try to go there. Thank you. What time did I start? Quarter to. You sure? What time you have?
It's 5:40.
So yeah, that's
Yeah, I would do that. Dina, do you think it's something other people would want to inherit?
I actually want to ask you a question.
In the middle?
Someone told me at that told me like 17. And told me about that really made me wonder. It made me just wonder. So which one? Well, it's just someone that I think when I was asking once, and Philly and I were talking, he was telling me about his background at the school. Actually, we had he was a top student, but he can draw very good. He was very good in and history. Can draw very well. School had him drawing some kind of self-competition. They actually, at the time when they told him he was, that was the time of the final exams, and he did not get a chance. The principal and his form teacher, when they sent out the painting, and for the competition, so they said, it was a nice student, and what happened was that years ago back to school, like, there was this principal, and the principal was like, having these term grades, so and when his mom was a teacher who was on the factories, when I got to see those teachers, the principal was like, I want to see parents, and when his mom was like, giving her you're not almost like so where's his hand? His hand. I don't see actually want
I was no grades, no.
And he said he really should take a lot of lessons. This is one thing I know is talking. And I'm like, that's really crazy. Almost 17, I think. But that's yeah, shook me. And I'm like, that's almost like you know, that principle.
More importantly, the people
And the
who put us
teacher, exactly, the teacher who just had the teacher who should have had his back is not. That hurts. So I was wondering, like, just watching that movie, I was thinking back. I said, I'm there saying, you know, there's so many ways it can impact. There's so many ways it can impact.
and you know, and you can't tell me you have to recognize. I mean, nobody's saying that you have to be the same, eat the same one. But I mean, that's what I like.
Yeah, and he didn't even realize that he was had to be home. Yeah, and he had to be home for the same thing. Exactly. And I'm saying,
It's not like now where you go online and the website gives you all the services and you want to go back.
I was saying that is very is that when I watched the movie, I'm like, you see those teachers, you see one teacher came kind of, you know, some of them they had to so they had to they had to say
I have a love for movies alone. Before I became a teacher, I mean, it's not that difficult.
I always love movies. I always
That for the jungle, just fine.
I don't remember everyone.
Even kindergarten, oh my goodness, kindergarten has been on the ground, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, all the children that, yes, children marching up. It's just a beautiful thing, but before we were there was a teacher, but I didn't have her, she was at my home. I was unfortunate. She was around us because when you don't know, it's not just like you're telling them. She be in the class and not take attention and speak to the child. And like, yes, all around schools, I know that don't say coming out somewhere about their hearing because she's let us know that everything I had ever heard about a teacher who was 800 just kind of ran through because she did teach the geo and she and the board and when I know that everyone is up here for right. Some people start to come into class with an no, just spot number, so I know I don't like this teacher, but she don't know. But some people, they just not their personalities, not their ways. Whether you're a teacher or not, you're in the study, plus it was 9th grade, you know, that time of you're trying to feel yes,
Start feeling it.
I'm always saying freedom song. I don't know why. It's so much music. But somebody said to me, I think somebody had said to me.
All right,
Yes.
ready to start back. Steve, Antigua Bay, not there. Oh, Dexton, you're there. We see you. Okay. All right. Picking back up now with the second article, which is called The Silence Dialogue, Power and Pedagogy in Educating Other People's Children. This article is a very critical, it's a piece of critical, it would be called critical theory, actually. And it's looking at, it's based on elements of cultural theory, which have to do with looking at the different ways in which culture can impact positively and negatively on opportunities given to different groups, different ethnic groups. In this article, Lisa Delpit talks about how in society there's a culture of power, and that culture of power is often transmitted into schools. What do you think she means by that? Anybody?
In society there is
A culture of power, and that culture of power is transmitted into schools because schools are linked to society. Some people say that schools are a microcosm. That's the phrase that's often used of society.
All right, could I take that?
Is that Vernon? Yes. Okay, go ahead, Vernon.
Yes, I think really what it means is that, right, I think what it means is that the societal values and mores tend to seep into the school environment, and a lot of times because the effect of certain influences, for example, the influences of the peer group that really is not only confined to school, but very often exists outside of school, tends to seep into school, into the school environment. It affects the education process. So that's really my interpretation of that, the cultural values of society. So, for example, the effect or the impact of dancehall culture, which how does that impact the learning, positively and negatively? Does it reduces how the students learn or retard the students' learning? Can we use it positively to get the students to learn the material?
Okay.
So that's my
Thank you, Vernon. That's part of it. For those of you who couldn't hear Vernon, Vernon is actually not physically here with us. He's in, where are you? In St. Elizabeth or Westmoreland? He's in the western part of the island. And he's
St. Elizabeth.
St. Elizabeth by audio. So he's saying that,
yeah.
I don't know if you could hear him. He was saying that part of that, he was speaking more to the elements of using culture in teaching, that you can take, just like Mrs. G used Tupac Shakur. In Jamaica's case, you could take elements of the dancehall culture, which could be considered negative in society, and twist it in the schools to make it a positive that would empower the students. That's part of what she's speaking about, yes? Sonia wanted to add?
My understanding.
Loudly.
My
Speak to the
understanding.
people.
Yes. My understanding of just repeat the topic again. Understand what I'm going to say.
The culture of power. You're not that old. The culture.
I have a lot on my mind.
How does the culture of power in society spill over into schools?
Right. And on that note, when we say school is a microcosm of society, basically it's just like a subset. So the same structures and rules governing how things are done, and who is the leader, who is the person in authority. So basically the same rules pertain in terms of who wields power, who wields authority, based on the structure that exists for this community.
Right. That's true. That's what she's talking about, and she's saying that a lot of that power is vested in the teacher.
The teacher, right.
Right? The teacher is the law, the king, the queen, whatever it is, in the classroom, the head of what goes on. So how the teacher sets the tone for learning and discussion and exchanges is how it's going to happen. If the teacher now, and this ties into the other articles that I emailed you today, if the teacher submits to social, what's the right way? Norms is not the best word, but social stereotyping, that can be taken, I don't even want to say as norms in the society, but social stereotyping that people just tend to, you don't even know necessarily that you're buying into it all the time, right? And that one of those for Jamaica would be that you would expect girls to outperform boys. That would be one social academically, right? That you would, well, look, at the University of the West Indies, 3/4 or more of the enrolled students are women.
Yes.
Look at where you're sitting. How many women are there versus men in each of you, in each grouping, right? So that, I mean, and the same is true in Kingston here. So one of the beliefs, sort of social understandings or something that we sort of accept is that, well, if I'm a Jamaican parent and I'm living in rural Jamaica and I go to market to sell produce and so on, I may send my girl to school. If I only have enough money to send lunch money for school, I have 5 children, I'm going to send my 2 girls more than my 3 boys or whatever it is. Boys will come with me to help me. But the girls, if I have to ration my money, I put it on the girls. Why? Because the girls are going to do better. It's a better bet.
Right.
And I'm not making that up. That's what people do in Jamaica, and it's been recorded, right? In study after study. So there's this belief that girls will outperform boys. So if when you're teaching in the class, you look around and you see yourself start to favoring the girls, having higher expectations from the girls, that's an example of an abuse of that culture of power. Could be, depending on how you deal with it. Whoa. Oh, somebody has the mic. Oh, Montego Bay. Go ahead. Yes. So you read that article. Good for you. So remind me of your name in Montego Bay. Kira. Carrie Ann. Okay. Carrie Ann is saying, is that the Pygmalion effect? Take off the mic. The Pygmalion effect. The Pygmalion effect refers to a musical and a story called My Fair Lady, which was also called Pygmalion, right, originally. You all know My Fair Lady. I'm not going to break out into song and about how the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain and all of that, because you wouldn't want to hear me sing. Okay? The idea behind that is that people rise to their expectations. That's what that effect is. So if you as a teacher hold a lot of power. She doesn't go into teacher expectation in great detail in this, but she certainly alludes to it. That teachers as a whole influence what goes on in the classroom. And that power is something that you have to understand, you have to respect, and you have to treat fairly with, not abuse. In this piece, she talks about having done research in many different ethnic communities with Eskimo Indians. That's not the right politically correct term. Oh, the Inuit peoples, that's the correct term. In different African American communities, in different Hispanic communities, in different groups that might not be considered the majority in America, numerically, although the Hispanics are now. When she wrote this, they weren't. So censuses say. And she says that because in different cultures, just like that example I gave you before of the anthropologist who in the American South was collecting data on stories and literacy skills and how the young people, the grade 1 child was more used to hearing stories told orally, and when he heard the stories, he walked around the classroom. He wasn't used to having to be having to sit in one place, and so he didn't know sort of the way things were supposed to go in the classroom in terms of storytelling, because his experience differed, his cultural experience differed, and how the teacher treated with that affected the student. It showed in her study. This is the same thing Lisa Delpit is talking about here. That certain groups, ethnic groups, based on the way in which they regard and see adults as how they should speak to children to get things done. So that she gives an example in here of how, what she says, you might hear an African-American mother would speak to the son about going to bathe. And it would be something like, you better get yourself in the bath. I can't do the accent. You better get yourself in the bath now and bathe. As opposed to giving him a choice and saying, don't you think it's time for you to bathe now. Why don't you go take a shower? Which is open-ended, more open-ended, choice-related, and is not how they would necessarily, in terms of her research, speak. But when you go into a classroom with a teacher who is speaking more like that, the teacher is not speaking to the child in a language or a body language that they're familiar with or that they might respect. And so the teacher has to make a conscious effort to look at those things and to consider just how much. You have to read the article to understand what I'm talking about. All right? How much both the body language and the way you phrase questions can be seen differently based on your own cultural grounding. Again, the example with the wink that I gave, or this movement with my eye, that if you didn't know why I was doing it, you might misinterpret and do the wrong thing, or take it in the wrong way, rather. So that's what she's talking about in this. Again, it has to do with critical theory, and it has to do with her trying to say that teachers, all kinds of teachers, regardless of what color, in America, race and culture and color are big issues. So people are always writing about that in the classroom because it has a lot to do with educational inequity, right? In America, like 1 in 4 children are born into poverty, and there's a huge yes, that's true. 1 in 4 children are born into poverty, and so there is a great effort and a lot of attention placed in policy and in academia on how do we narrow this gap? How do we narrow the achievement gap? That's what the gap is called. Okay? And they're saying, what kinds of teachers would children from low-income situations perform best for? And low-income situations come from different ethnic groups. Okay? So she's trying to explain it, and basically I brought this article to the class because it raises some interesting questions. So she says, issues of power are enacted in classrooms on a daily basis. There are rules for participating in that, meaning there's a culture of power, just like there is in society. And that's the term cultural capital. So that's a sociological term, cultural capital. There's economic capital, which means whether or not you have money or assets, physical assets, a car, a house, right? That's economic capital, land that you own. Social capital, which means that you can network, you can pick up the phone and call whoever and broker deals because you know the people, a social capital, or you're considered to be in a certain level of society. There's economic, social, and cultural. Cultural has to do with what does your society regard as high culture, in quotation marks, and low culture, in quotation marks. So a long, long time ago, when museums used to only be for people that of a certain class were open to going, that would even consider going, to a museum that wouldn't be put off by how austere the museum looked and how closed the museum looked. Now museums are competing for people's attention and money all around the world. So that stereotyping is breaking down, and they're going into communities and saying, please come to my museum and have a cocktail party and have a dance hall party and do whatever you want. I want you to come to my museum. So it's different now. But in the old days, museums would have been an example of high culture. Classical music would have been an example of high culture at that time, right? And for example, dance hall music would not be considered an example of high culture, right? But now, with the way that young people are blending and melding things, and music and elements of culture are moving across the world at much faster paces, this distinction between high culture and low culture is breaking down, all right? But for the purposes of understanding what cultural capital is, it's the idea that some people, based on what socioeconomic level they're born into, are imbued or given a certain sense of a certain amount of cultural capital that other people don't have, and they have to acquire. So the understanding that a regular activity would be going to listen to the orchestra or going to the ballet, right, as opposed to going to the neighborhood dance. That's the idea, and that cultural capital can be converted into economic capital and social capital. And that in the classroom, some teachers react to different students based on what they perceive to be their cultural capital. When that phrase was coined, it was by a sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu, and I'll send you a definition of cultural capital, so don't freak out. Pierre Bourdieu was writing in France in the early part of the 20th century. So it's before this sort of mass media age, okay? But the idea simply remains that in the same way that you can be born with economic capital, or you can acquire it, you can be born with social capital, or you can acquire it because you gain economic capital. You can be born with cultural capital, or you can acquire it. And the acquisition always has to do with economic capital first, actual money, right? Yeah, green is the bottom line, as Davey is saying. So that's changing now rapidly because, for example, the ballet, which used to be an elitist activity, is now shown in movie theaters. So people who couldn't afford to go and buy the 120, whatever, how much dollar ticket to go sit in this fabulous theater can go to the movie theater for a much cheaper amount and watch the same ballet, danced by the same people. Or you can look at it on YouTube and don't pay for anything. Well, your internet service, but anyhow, or go to some cafe and use theirs. Right, so that's the element of cultural capital. So she says, the rules of the culture of power reflect the rules of the culture of the people who have the power. So they're linked. The culture of the people who have power want to keep their power, so they reinforce their rules, right? If you are not already a participant, this is on the third page of the article, 282, yes. If you are not already a participant in the culture of power, being told explicitly what the rules of that culture are make it easier. So the example that she gives, probably the easiest example of this, is she's talking to a student who is African American again, in this case, and she's asking the student to talk about a book that he had read. And the book has pieces that are in English and pieces that are in standard English and pieces that are in African American dialect. I don't know if it's Ebonics or what it is. She doesn't explain it. And she says to the student, how did you like the book or the story? He says, it was okay, it was fine. She says, well, what did you think about the way it was written? And he says, well, I think it would have been better if it had been written in English. And she says, why? And he says, because, you know, if you're teaching people that it's okay to write and speak like that, if the school is saying it's okay because it's in the book, then you're not giving them what they need to be able to go out into the world and move on. He doesn't say it like that, but that's what he's implying, that it would give them greater strength or greater power if they were able to communicate in the language that they need to communicate in. So he himself, as he's an African-American student, he understands the dialect, but he's saying, you know, he's not so sure the school should be sanctioning that. Because really, aren't we sent here to learn what we need to learn to move on up? And we already know this, which is interesting to me. In Jamaica, our language policy, we speak 2 languages. We acknowledge 2 languages in our education system. St. Lucia, you would probably acknowledge 3, maybe. We acknowledge English and Standard Jamaican English, which is also called Patois, right? But it's an English-based Patois, very heavily English-based Patois. But the idea is that teachers are supposed to be taught to honor the home language of the child. So not to berate the child if the child speaks Patois, but I'm pretty sure teachers do that. But they're not supposed to do that based on the policy. And if they themselves are switching into Patois back and forth, they are to make it clear to the student that they're code switching. That's what it's called in the literature. Hold on. So obviously the student knows you're switching, but you need to, what they mean by that is to say to the student and to drive the point home to the student that this is how we say this in English, this is how we say it in Patois or in Standard Jamaican English. For the purposes of your writing, I'd like you to write in English because the tests are given in English. They're not given in Patois or Standard Jamaican English right now. I don't see that we're moving to that in the near future. There have been movements that have tried to say that we should, like in Canada, we should change all our road signs and we should change all our packaging to be in English and Patois or Standard Jamaican English, and we should change all our textbooks. That's not going to happen because that's going to cost a lot of money, and that would cause a huge outcry. But what is happening is that you see elements of the Standard Jamaican English infused in the textbooks. So you see excerpts from poems, you have audio things that you listen to, you have vocabulary that's in Standard Jamaican English that the children are asked, what does it mean? So you do see that sense of honoring the language. But the language of business in the country is English. And the language of testing in the country is English. So you want the children to learn English. But what we are not doing effectively, I think, this is my opinion, we are not brokering that transition effectively enough for our young students moving from our early childhood institutions into primary school. So that those students are always this is our achievement gap. To me, this is the root of our achievement gap. Always at a disadvantage to the students whose home language is English, which make up a small percentage of the population. Yes, Alyssa?
You mentioned a policy that I'm not familiar with. I just wanted to...
It's called the language policy.
I know, as in, I wasn't aware that there was such a policy. I don't know what it says. So
it says what I just said, that you should honor the home language of the student and you should teach English. But you should not berate any student who's speaking Patois. You shouldn't criticize them. You should honor the home language, and it gives all the reasons why you should do that.
How new is the policy?
It's less than 10 years old.
Okay, that's not that new.
It exists. Yeah, I mean, that's not that old. Yes, from where? Bermuda?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
In that case now, okay, suppose, for example, a teacher asks his class to write a composition or an essay, and that student will write it in Patois. How the teacher grading standard English or Patois?
Well, you tell me, how do you think the teacher should deal with that?
No, based on what you said, the teacher should not grade.
It's there. It's there.
Well, I think if it was me, if I was that teacher and I had asked the students to write an essay, and I hadn't been clear saying I wanted them to write it in English, and they wrote me an essay in Patois, I would sit down with them and go through it with them and discuss it with them and help them switch it into English. I would compliment them probably on the strength of the language, because our language, our Patois is very expressive, and it's very melodical is the word, or rhythmic. So I would want the child to read it with me and talk about why he said what he said, and then help him to see how he can take those same ideas and put them into English. So I probably wouldn't grade it. I probably would say, this is our first draft, and I didn't ask you to write it in Patois or standard Jamaican English. I need it in English for the purposes of the class, and I would give him a chance. What I think happens to our students, a lot of our students, is that when they're writing, their frame of reference in their minds, in orally, just like when I write, I say to myself, oh, does this sound right? My frame of reference is English. So if I'm writing an English essay and I say, does this sound right? And I find myself saying, yes, it sounds right, and I leave it. My frame of reference in my mind is English. So it's English and English. But in our children, in many of our students, when they're writing, their frame of reference may not be English. And so they're saying to themselves, does this sound right? Because they may not know how to spell it, or whether it's in Patois, statements become questions based on how you use your voice. Right? This is not unique to Jamaica. This is true in other islands too. Right? And so I think if we did an analysis of our writing, of their writing at grade 4, when they take a test with a writing component, and they're old enough now to be writing, that perhaps a lot of the mistakes that are made on the writing segment might be correct in Patois, in terms of the phrasing. Like in Patois, you wouldn't say, to say something is very pretty or pretty, you might say it's pretty pretty, or it's pretty pretty pretty, or it's pretty bad. But you don't mean that it's bad, you mean that it's very pretty. It's pretty bad. It's well pretty, you might say. So when you're writing that, that's incorrect in English, but it would be correct in Patois. In English, you would say it's very pretty, or it's beautiful, it's magnificent, it's exquisite, it's fabulous, and there's other words, right? But in Patois, you for emphasis, you would repeat the word. Yeah, no, I know. I'm not making it up, right? Or you would say, yeah, well, you can't really do an intonation with pretty. Pretty is pretty. Pretty, yeah.
Pretty is emphasis in Patois.
Yeah.
Pretty.
Pretty, yes, you would say that. And so that's why
Repetition is what.
yeah, repetition gives emphasis, and you use double negatives and stuff like that. So there are certain ways that a teacher, you would hope the teacher would speak both languages, or would be comfortable in both languages to some extent, so that the teacher could help bridge the student. That's what your job is, right? I would think. So the student knows how to speak Patois. You're not teaching them how to speak it. They already know. And there's no particular accepted, well, there are some people that say there are accepted forms of writing it, and there are certain ways of spelling, and that's debatable, right? But it's not a written language. It's an oral language. That's how it has survived. And it keeps evolving. So our language has contributed words to the dictionary, like bling bling. Bling bling is now in the dictionary. Yes. I don't know how they developed the word bling, the term, but now the term is in the dictionary. Bling bling is like flashy jewelry or very stylish. Am I missing anything with bling bling? No.
Glittery,
shiny. Right. Okay. I got totally sidetracked. What was I talking about? The language. And so language is an element of power. So how do teachers determine what the cultural background of the students are? One of the obvious ways is the language.
And that determines how you carry your lesson.
Yeah. Because they're all wearing uniforms, they're dressed the same, by and large. Although there are distinctions among the uniforms and the type of bag and all of that that's being carried. And shoes, right. And stuff in the hair, and if there's jewelry and so on. So those are symbols of economic capital, right? And then how the student might interact with other students and the body language. Those are some silent cultural signals that people pick up on, even when they're not necessarily reflecting on the fact that they're doing that. It doesn't have to be economic. It could be that the child is very athletic, and in your mind you think, well, athletes don't do really well usually, so I'm not going to worry about the athletes. They don't have to do well. They're going to stay in school because school needs them to jump over the hurdles really well and run fast and play football. Right? So it doesn't really matter what I do. They'll still be here. So those are examples of the elements of power in the classroom. Did anybody want to say something to that?
Power in the classroom, parents and
Parents.
What about the parents? Sonia is mentioning parents. That's a good idea. What about parents?
Power. Miss, why are you looking at me like that?
No, go ahead.
So the influence there would be the more affluent sometimes. More affluent.
The less the teachers want to deal with them. Want to argue with them.
All right, let's separate it. Less than want to argue with them. Yes. As well as there are two sides to that person with the capital. You have one with the economic capital that you might deal with and you might tolerate. So they are not of the polished social class. So they happen to have economic power. So yeah, anything teacher do, just go and do it. You have the books, you have everything, you have the right clothes, but you still know that you're not from the polished class. And then you have the upper class, the polished class. So the teacher would tread gingerly, carefully with this other student. So
yeah, but see, those are diplomatic skills. The teacher also has to be a bit of a diplomat.
Yes.
Right?
Know how to flex.
Yes, you have to know how to flex. That's a phrase. That's a popular phrase. All right. But one of the things she did. Yes. I did acknowledge that. All right. So the importance that I want you to take from this in terms of thinking of the foundation of education.
We're saying we're using you and you.
Okay, that's fine. But they can't hear.
Did you say you were going to code switch? You just take her.
I did code switch.
Meet with her afterwards and show her the proper way to do it.
But that wasn't so bad. That was borderline. Anyway, moving on. I actually would like to hear from St. Lucia because St. Lucia has French, English, and their Creole.
Yes, that's true.
French Creole. It's a French Creole. And how language issues play out for you. Anybody? Okay, one at a time. So you teach in English?
Yes, ma'am.
But the students come in speaking Creole?
Not in all schools.
Not in all schools. So the schools. All right. Can you elect one person to speak?
Raise your hand.
And that person, raise your hand so we can see you. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, where I teach, we don't have the problem where students come and speak in Creole. We teach in English, they write English. But the problem comes, there is this direct translation from the Creole to English sometimes. So it's not standard English that they write. So you always have to correct them, especially in like subject verb agreement. There's a lot of problems with that, and there's a direct translation. Because our Creole is French-based.
Yes.
So the structure is different. So that's why they have, like, some students will have more problems writing standard English if they come from a household where they speak mainly Creole.
Right.
But the other teacher will have more experiences with speaking Creole in classrooms. I'll leave it to someone else.
Yes, I teach in the city. In the city, it's not much of a problem because they speak English. Many of them in the city, they don't really, they're not interacting with people who speak Creole, but in the rural areas, they speak more Creole than they do in the city.
And it's the same is true for us. Somebody has to turn off the mic. Okay, is it you? Thank you. Okay. So I've always wondered if it's easier or harder because our Creole, our patois is English based, and it's English that's our standard, our language of business, versus in St. Lucia where English, your Creole is French based, but you're teaching English. Whether that's harder because it's a more distinct language or it's easier because you don't make the mistakes because the backing and forthing isn't as similar.
Well, they still make the mistake because, like I said, there's a direct translation. So if they say a phrase, okay, for example, if you directly translate it's raining, in our Creole it will be that rain is falling, and they would write that down, rain is falling. Instead of saying it's raining.
Right, which is the same. So, like, if we are learning, we do that too. We would do that. Right. So we would say we would say rain or fall, and their children would write rain is falling or rain is fall because they wouldn't know the falling. That would be the thing. Yeah. But it's the same.
The backward thing too because French, the adjective usually people did, it's just different. You would say the noun and then the descriptive part.
So it's very similar for us. Bermuda, you don't have that issue. Dominica, you don't have that issue as much. Dominica does. But it's okay. I go ahead. I haven't had the pleasure of going to Dominica. I have been to Bermuda and I have been to St. Lucia, both lovely islands. But I have not yet been to Dominica. I have been to Montego Bay. And I have been to St. Elizabeth, Vernon. Sorry, go ahead, Dominica.
In Dominica, we have English, and then Dominican English. Then we have French patois, and we also have something called Cocoy.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting. What is that? Is that
Cocoy is those people migrated from Antigua and up the island, very close to the Jamaican patois, like them pygmy them. It's also in children. So it's very much like the Jamaican patois. That is Cocoy.
Oh, that's interesting. Did you all know that?
No, I know that.
You knew that. Oh, we have an administrator here. Oh, they hear you. They hear you. Yes, his name is Valentine. You can say hi. Yes. One day you can come and do that for us. Yes. All right. I didn't. So you have more languages than we do to deal with then.
Yes.
Bermuda, do you have that issue? Bermuda was very English speaking when I was there. I don't know what it's like now.
Bermuda had some issues with we have a Bermudian accent. I don't really know the problem with the accent.
Yes, we
hear
it.
When it comes to spelling certain words, they might spell it very phonetically, like how they say it. So it comes from like the word electricity. We might just say electricity. So they'll spell it like L-A-T.
Oh,
very
light. But okay, so more of a spelling conversion to writing issue than another language issue. What's happening too with a lot of young people in terms of writing is the effect of texting.
Yep.
So
that's global.
Texting, global. That's not just in Jamaica or in any of the islands. Just a short form of the way people write things, and you'll get essays where they write LOL. And,
serious?
Yeah, I mean, or they put through THRU, or they put U as the letter U and R as the letter R, because they've seen it written, so it's in print. Yeah, no, they do that.
Send them to my class.
No, and they're lazy. And they do that, and then you have to teach them that that's another language, that's texting.
Yes.
That's another language. It's a global thing.
Modern
Right.
global.
And in fact, I don't know if any of you have thought of this, but the flip side of texting is that for one community in particular globally, that has really revolutionized their communication, and that is the deaf community.
Absolutely. Wow.
So the deaf community, members of the deaf community around the world can text to each other. They don't have to have different sign language because there's different sign languages, American Sign Language, Jamaican Sign Language, British Sign Language, which are somewhat similar, but somewhat different, some different letters. I don't know, I don't speak sign language, but I've been told. And that texting has really revolutionized the way young deaf people communicate.
That's a good one.
Yeah, never thought about that, huh?
But at the CCCJ conference this one here?
Loudly.
I was just saying at the, was it CCCJ conference this year, there was a paper presented. I think we should try and get it for the class.
I wouldn't have access to it, but yeah.
I'll get try. Okay. But there was a Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica. There was a paper presented by persons from the deaf community, and they were saying that they feel marginalized. And the guy is very handsome and very good looking, you know, and he was saying whenever he goes into a room, they're like, is he really deaf? Is this for real? But he's very brilliant. He finishes his bachelor's and they're doing research and making presentations.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, in terms of Jamaica has come a long way, I think, with the deaf community, because we now have a lot of events are simultaneously interpreted for deaf people that are covered on TV. Parliament is always interpreted.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not making any, this is not anything, right? Yeah, I just use my hands a lot. I don't remember any.
That's your nonverbal.
Yes. So I want to close with the high expectation articles that I sent you today, which you haven't read. But, and Alyssa is not here, and she was the one who raised this issue. She was the one who expressed great disbelief that teachers could form expectations of students that could then impact their performance. And these articles show that in fact that happens, and it happens routinely. And sometimes the teachers are not even aware that they're doing that. It can even be in body language, in that, you know, you're smiling more at the girls than you do at the boys, or vice versa. Yeah, so people are in there observing what they're doing. And it's saying that once you become aware of this, and you start to focus on creating expectations for your students that are equal and high, that your students, this is the Pygmalion effect, your students will rise. That more often than not, they rise to the expectation.
True.
And that in itself is a simple way that you can begin to work to close the achievement gap. Because you're working on building their self-esteem. You're working on building them wanting to come to class, because now they're not being criticized or they're not being marginalized, but they're being welcomed, or they're being supported, or they're being encouraged, like the +2 that the lady put on the paper, right? So both articles really speak to that. One is a survey of an entire public school system that shows, I don't know what state it is. It could be Illinois, Springfield, Illinois. Springfield is in Dallas, is in Texas too. I don't know. I don't remember which state. There's probably more than one Springfield.
Many.
But it's saying also that when you create expectations, high expectations for your students, you also have to then learn how to differentiate your instruction. So you have to learn how to tailor your instruction to meet the different types of learners that you have in front of you, right? So in a couple of weeks, you'll be reading more about multiple intelligences. Those of you who haven't already been exposed to that theory, that's a theory that talks about different types of learners, and by Howard Gardner. I'm not going to go into that now. But suffice it to say that as a teacher, it's really important never to forget the power that your expectations can carry.
That's true.
Even if you are tired and you are jaded and you're hungry and whatever it is, you know, you want to communicate to your students that you believe in them. And that's what is the seminal message of that film. That's what she does. That's what she does.
She had to get even in the beginning.
Yeah. And in fact, in the articles, they say that particularly with children from lower socioeconomic levels, SESs, lower socioeconomic stratus, this high expectation, this sense that your teacher believes a person in authority, a central figure, central adult, for many who come from single parent homes or who don't have a stable adult in their life, the teacher takes that role. You didn't ask for that role, but you're given that role, right? That's a lot of responsibility. And that if you then convey to them that you have high expectations, that you believe that you're willing to help, that can make all the difference in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Some of you mentioned that a little bit as having had an experience with a teacher that did that for you. So you can relate to it firsthand, right? All right, are there any questions? No? Okay, so in closing, what I want to also emphasize is that high expectations is not only something that you believe, it's something that you do. So it's not just that you yourself are believing that you have high expectations, you have to communicate that to the students in the way that you act towards them, in the way that you respond to their questions, in the way that you speak to them, in the way that you grade their papers, etc. Okay? So, and again, the easy reference for you all with that is the +2. Or even the way that she mentioned her mother who was a teacher for many years, and she kept a drawer with a cloth and a soap and a peanut butter. Peanut butter is interesting because now there's so much about nut allergies that I wouldn't say keep peanut butter. Maybe something else. I don't know what.
In an American school, you don't.
Yeah, no. Even in the school where my children go, you can't bring peanuts into the school.
Yeah, they have hives and all these new diseases.
Because I don't know. That's another story.
Those are some high-tech news things.
I don't know.
They get hives.
I mean, you couldn't do that. No, you wouldn't keep peanut butter. No, in an American school.
But it's true.
And even again, the way she said in the beginning, she's referred to this chat that she taught them. I can't remember all of it, but something like that they were chosen, that she was the best, and they were the best, and they were chosen to be in her class, and they have places to go and people to see and things to do, and yeah, and that they would repeat it and say it over and over again, and they would start to believe it.
Yes.
Powerful stuff. Simple stuff. Not learned in a school, not learned in a teacher preparation program. She didn't go to a class and somebody said to her, here's a chant that you should use. No. She came up with that based on her reality. I'm sure. Teachers are born, yeah, not made. Well, I don't know.
I think so.
All right. So for next week now, the reading, let me go over what
Teachers
the
were
reading
born,
is.
not made. I'm a teacher, but I'm not a teacher by training. I'm a journalist.
Next week, all right. Next week's reading is one chapter that will introduce you to three main theories, three main sociology of education theories: conflict theory, functionalism, and interactionism. Those are the three theories I want you to focus on. He will mention others. Those are the three I want you to focus on. Functionalism, it'll be in that order. Functionalism, conflict theory, and interactionism. I will do a PowerPoint presentation that will give you key components of each of those theories, and you would see each of those theories when you start to read about them. You'll see them at play in the film, and you'll see them when you think about your own schooling.
Your own schooling.
Your own schooling
Okay.
that you experienced as a student, and perhaps where you're teaching now. No one theory defines all schools. Most schools are a mixture of all three. But they're written about in that order because that's the order in which they were proposed. Functionalism first, then conflict theory, and then interactionism. That's the chronological order of the development of the theories. That's how he talks about them, in that order. So it's that one reading, and we will discuss the theories in class. I will ask you to think about times in your own schooling when one or the other seemed more predominant. And then the second half, after the break, since you all did so well today with the break, we will start switching and talk a little bit about youth culture. All right, and for that activity, I need you to bring into your groups an example of a form of youth media. It could be a youth newspaper. We have those in Jamaica. It could be an online magazine. It could be a website. It could be, well, those are mostly it. What else could it be? A YouTube channel. A YouTube channel, right? And obviously, in the other countries, we can't all see what you bring in. So you're going to have to be able to tell us a little bit about what it is. So if it's an e-zine, you have to tell us the name of the e-zine is Youth Today. It discusses X, Y, Z about life in Dominica. Okay? And we will look at what is culture, how does culture play out in the classroom, what in fact is youth culture, and how can you build on that to teach. And that activity will become more clear once you bring the articles in. So please do not come next week without some form of a youth form of media, whether it's on your phone, on your computer, or in hard copy. Who's asking me something? Jason?
Yes.
It should be for youth. It should be for youth. It's something intended for youth. Now, Jason, it could be by youth for youth,
Apologies.
or it could just be for youth. Vernon, you have a question.
No man, Vernon sound like more answer somebody outside.
Oh, Vernon, not talking to me. Okay.
No, my apologies. I thought I was on mute. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Oh dear.
All right, never mind. All right, so are there any questions? Any questions? Anybody? Anywhere? Oh, I want to say something about the assignment. Some of you are asking me if you can resubmit the assignment after you've received the grade. The answer to that is no. Absolutely not. I cannot take that on. That's not happening. Okay? So, in other words, Kingston, I apologize to Kingston. It's because I can read yours in hard copy that you are the last to receive it. But I will endeavor to finish yours and email them to you. Everybody else should have received theirs back pretty much. You cannot resubmit it to up your grade. Please understand that that assignment was only 10% of the entire course. So, if you think you did horribly, which most of you did not, you have a chance to do better. Some of you simply forgot to attach a photo or reference to the thing that was the object, and that was part of the rubric. It says in the assignment, please include a copy, a photo, or something or other, so that I know what you're talking about. And I also said it verbally. So you lose 1 point for that. 1 point out of 10 is a big point. Only a few of you did that. Only a few of you did that. Hold on. Next thing. If you wish to submit drafts to me, I will endeavor to read them and reply. That's all I would do. But I will not edit the draft and sit there and edit the grammar and so on. So a few of you could have benefited by simply running a spell check on the paper. Right? A few of you could have just run the spell check and it would have made a difference in the grammatical thing. Or you read it out loud to yourself and you check. What is that? Who's speaking? So, the 2 points to take away from that, whoever's hitting the mic, shut it off, please. Thank you. 2 points. I will try to read drafts. I can't promise you I'm really busy, but I will try. Second point is, please proofread the paper before you send it in. Very important. Because when you proofread, you get two things. You get grammar that you might not pick up in a spell check, and you can tell the flow of your ideas. When I grade, I look for the flow of ideas. If you mention one thing at the top, and there's no train of thought that brings it to the end, that's not good. That's not a strong paper. That means you wrote it very quickly, you weren't thinking. This was a very small grade because it's a reflection. So we didn't even go into how you cite sources in this. Some of you did cite sources, and more power to you, fabulous, wonderful. But many of you didn't use any sources, and that's fine, it was a reflection. In the next paper, you need to refer to the readings. Do not hand in a film critique where you retell me the story of the film. I know the story of the film very well. I know the characters very well. I simply do not tell me it was set in Los Angeles. Don't go into any long detail about the Rodney King riots and the racial situation in America. No. Get to the meat of the matter, right? Which is a critique of the film as to how it relates to the education theories which you're reading for next week. And then you can look at the other readings in the course to date to augment your argument about the teaching that you see taking place, right? When you do it, you have to refer to the article. And if you're quoting the author, you cannot start a quote here and then the quote never ends. A lot of you do that. You open a quote and it doesn't end. It needs to end. And the page number needs to go beside it. It's APA style. If you don't know what APA style is, Google it. Right? At this point, you should know what it is. If you don't know what it is, I'm sure there are any number of YouTube tutorials that can help you. It's a very easy way to cite. Please do not lift entire sections out of an article and tell me that it is your writing, because I will be able to tell. It's not hard to figure it out. And that's plagiarism. So we don't want to do that. If you are going to paraphrase it, that's fine. But you still put the author and the year. There's no page number for that because you're paraphrasing a concept in the article. Okay? So what I want to see in those film critiques and in any piece of writing is your thoughts backed up by the reading. That's it. With a flow of ideas, with normal size font, with normal size spacing, with a proper citation thing listed at the end, a proper thing of references. Proper. And I don't mean like Wikipedia references. Proper references done the way you're supposed to do them. Right? And good grammar. There's nothing that upsets a teacher more when you're grading than constant misspelling and the comma is not in the right place and it's pedantic, and you're way past that now. So the trick to that is to read over the paper. More than once. Give it to somebody else to read so that they can say to you, well, I didn't understand what you meant here. Maybe you need to explain this more, because they didn't see the film. So they would be able to help you by giving a fresh look to your paper. Some of you are naturally good writers, actually. So far, some of you seem to be naturally good writers. So kudos to you. You have a good voice, you have a strong voice, and it flows. So just go with that. Those of you that don't feel you have a good voice or a strong voice, it's not a bad idea to have a colleague read it and ask questions which help you to flesh it out. That's it.
This is so strong today.
Thank you.
I
didn't sound strong last week.
Strong is idolized.
Oh, idolized. Have a good evening, everybody. Good night. Good night, Verna.
Was that cultural reference? Was that just checking.
You need to say that's what
You need to apologize before you start.
Miss, when I say strong in a miss, what do you think I mean?
No, it's you to say.
Miss, what do you think I mean? You sound strong, like